Hello and welcome to another video on chart calculations for the Astrology Practice website. I'm going to talk a bit about the triplicity rulers now. This calculation method is coming from Valens, who is one of the traditional Hellenistic astrologers from ancient Egypt. I think a lot of his methods were learned in the Middle East and ancient Egypt. And one of the ones that was truly impressive to me, it wasn't too impressive at first when I first learned about it. So I've learned about it studying Hellenistic astrology with Chris Brennan. That is where I learned about the importance of the anthology by Valens, which is a very good book on astrology. I was not too impressed by this method at the beginning, but then I started to apply it to myself and to some of my friends and family and to some of the celebrities that I used to follow, and some of the slowly I started to apply it to people who are coming to me for readings, and I discovered that it's actually pretty accurately describing your life situation, but obviously it is describing it from a couple of vantage points. So let's take the example of King Charles. I've actually never looked at the triplicity rulers for his chart, but I've used him as an example earlier, so we can have a look at him now so everybody knows who King Charles is. I've calculated it twice, I think. Everybody knows who King Charles is. Everybody and all modern astrologers have looked at his relationship with Diana. I've used him as an example for the synastry method. So among the methods, one of them is synastry and compatibility. I've used King Charles and Princess Diana to look at the synastry between them, and to show how that method works. You can check out a video. It should be on my website and on my YouTube channel. So if we look at the triplicity rulers, this is a pretty short reading compared to the natal reading or the synastry. This is relatively short and sweet. It might be a little bit more difficult to understand, especially if you don't know a lot about astrology and you don't have a lot of concepts about how traditional astrology works. But in astrology we have the sun and the moon position, which almost everybody knows about. Not everybody knows the sign of their moon, but many people do now, much more than before. And the lot of fortune. The lot of fortune is calculated depending on the time you're born. If you're born at night, we look at the distance between the moon. We look at the distance from the moon to the sun, and we take the same distance in the same direction from the ascendant, and we move in the chart in zodiacal order the same distance between the moon and the sun in the same direction, and that point will be the lot of fortune. If you're born during the day, you look at the distance between the sun and the moon, so it's the opposite direction. Instead of from the moon to the sun, you look at the distance from the sun to the moon, and that is the lot of fortune. The lot of fortune, I think, is one of the best points to analyze from this framework of the triplicity rulers of Valens, because the lot of fortune describes in a very objective manner the substance and the ease with which your life went, and with which your life is going in general. The lot of fortune describes your circumstances, but in a pretty fated manner. So if you've had a relatively easy life, if you've had a relatively good life, the lot of fortune will probably be very strong from the vantage point of the triplicity rulers. So if the lot of fortune is in In a water sign, you look at the triplicity rulers, the three rulers of water, which are Mars, Venus, and the Moon, and you see the condition that they are in. If the lot of fortune is in air, like we have for King Charles here, we look at the three planets that rule the air triangle. That's what triplicity actually means. Maybe I should have mentioned that. So we look at the air triangle ruled by Mercury, Saturn, and the participating ruler Jupiter, and their condition. For example, for King Charles, we have Mercury as the first ruler. It is in Scorpio. It is in the fourth house from the ascendant. It is very fortunate because that is an angle. And we also look at the condition of Mercury. The planet Mercury for Charles is in Scorpio, so it is ruled by Mars. Its condition is a bit weakened because its ruler Mars does not witness it, which means it does not make an aspect with Mercury. However, from fortune, Mercury falls in the 10th house. So from the lot of fortune, Mercury is angular again. From the ascendant, Mercury was angular because he was in the fourth sign from the ascendant. Mercury is in the 10th sign from the lot of fortune. So this is the same as saying it's in the 10th house or the 10th whole sign house, which is a truly excellent position, because being in the first or in the 10th house from the ascendant or from the lot of fortune, that is a position of great power. So his Mercury already is the first ruler, and it's in amazing condition because by house it is positioned into angular houses, one by fortune, one from the ascendant, and that shows probably, it shows a lot of privilege. It shows that life is relatively easy. It shows that you're very, very well supported in life. The first ruler is said in the work of Valens to be particularly useful for looking at how your life begins and how supported you are in your life, especially in the first half or in the beginning. And Saturn, the second ruler of air, will describe for King Charles what his life is like later on. And it seems like Saturn is a little bit more difficult because it's in the second house from the ascendant. It is moderately fortunate. The second house is one of the more difficult houses, but it's probably the best of the most difficult houses. So the difficult houses are the second, the 8th, the 6th, and the 12th, pretty much in that order. So the second is the least difficult, and the 12th is the most difficult, the most unfortunate. His Saturn falls in the second house from the ascendant, so it's moderately unfortunate, I guess. It's mildly unfortunate, maybe, I should have said, but yeah, moderately unfortunate. It is witnessed by its ruler, by Mercury, by sextile, which improves its condition. So if a planet is in a bad house, at least if it makes an aspect with a planet that is being ruled by, that will improve its condition. From fortune, Saturn falls in the 8th house. That is again pretty bad. It's moderately unfortunate. It probably shows a lot of secrets, and just objectively, and from what we could have seen objectively, King Charles's life in the second half, in the later years, it was indeed quite difficult because of the divorce from Diana. He had divorced, which was frowned upon. He was in a lot of trouble for supposedly, allegedly, cheating on Princess Diana with Camilla. Later on, the royal family had all sorts of issues with Prince Andrew and all the questionable things he was involved with, all the secretive, questionable things he was involved with, which make me think of the 8th house quite a bit, because the 8th house is a place where you kind of keep your embarrassing things, where you keep things you don't really want other people to know about because they make you feel a little bit uncomfortable to share. Very often, I think, for example, people really don't like to share how much they earn or how much they pay in tax or what their salary is, because it's quite embarrassing to share it. You don't know how other people are going to feel about it, or if you're going to be judged, and it can have a pretty big impact on you if you feel like you're not as good or as strong or as powerful as your friends in that area, for example, right? So the eighth house is a house where we keep embarrassing things. It is a house of it's on the axis that has to do with money. That's why I talked about the salary part. But other secrets and psychology sometimes is associated with it. Depth psychology, things that we have a bit hidden into our unconscious, but not totally unconscious. They are hidden from sight. We're kind of aware of them. It's not quite as bad as the 12th house, where things are completely hidden from sight, and many people are completely unaware of the things they have in the 12th house. And Jupiter is a participating ruler. This one is supporting both Mercury and Saturn. I guess Jupiter is still in pretty good condition. It's in the fifth house from the ascendant. Apart from the angles, the first, the seventh, the fourth, and the 10th houses, the fifth house is another very fortunate, very good house to have planets in, because it supports the ascendant very well. And the 11th house as well. So the 5th and the 11th, they're both quite strong. I think the difference between them is marginal. Some people say the 11th house is stronger. Some people say the 5th house is stronger. But they're both quite fortunate. And Jupiter is in a fortunate house by a lot of fortune and by the ascendant in relation to both of those. So you can see how the lot of fortune can describe somebody who has quite a bit of privilege and who's had quite a bit of issues in their life. So I mostly look at the triplicity rulers of fortune. You can also look at the triplicity rulers of the sun and the moon, but those are a little bit more different. If you are born at night, so if you are born when the sun was under the horizon, you probably should look at the triplicity ruler of the moon. If you're born during the day, you should probably look at the triplicity ruler of the sun. Again, this is a pretty difficult method, so if you don't have any knowledge of astrology at all, it's going to be a bit difficult to understand what all of these things mean. Probably this is probably overload, but you can always go to an AI model to explain it if you are really interested in it, or you can find information online, or you can get a copy of the anthology by Valens, and all the explanations are in there. But yeah, it takes quite a bit of skill to understand this method. I try to simplify it by simply calling some positions very fortunate or excellent, mildly unfortunate, or fortunate. So you can see, at least roughly, you can get an idea, is my life from this perspective completely unfortunate, or is it moderate? Is it still supported? I can give you an idea of your fate, which is what astrology is supposed to help us study. At the end, again, there is a bit of a disclaimer saying that obviously any decision that you make after you read these interpretations is completely yours. And the condition of a planet can be modified in many, many different ways. There are so many ways in which it can be modified. So any method, any calculation method that you find here will be quite general, quite simplified, and it shouldn't be used in isolation. You need to look at a whole chart. You need to look at a couple of methods to judge things correctly. So don't panic, or don't become scared if some method shows some difficulty related to your life. There are many, many things to look into before making a final decision. So this was it, and thank you for checking out a video on the triplicity rulers.